Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're just after 4 o'clock now, so we'll start. Thank you very much for taking time out for today's webinar. Yes, it's another Zoom meeting, but hopefully it's going to be very enjoyable. Just before we go into the slides, I think it's always useful just to see who are going to be the presenters today. My name's Andy Bates. I'm one of the co-founders of Bounce Together. I'm going to be hosting the event today. But also, we've got Bob Wilkinson, Managing Director of Bounce Together. There he is waving. We've got Adrian Bethune from Teachappy, and we've also got Liz Dawson from Carnegie Mental Health. So they're going to be the three people doing, thankfully, most of the talking today, rather than me. So again, thank you very much for everyone coming on the call today. So I'm going to go into some slides now and just spend 5 minutes doing an introduction before I hand you over to Bob, Adrian and Liz. So hopefully you can see my screen. So just before we begin, I guess a few housekeeping rules. The webinar is going to be recorded, and actually you will also receive the recording of the webinar in a follow-up email. If you could kindly put yourself on mute in consideration for others. I think we're all used to dogs barking and people running behind each other, but if you could put yourself on mute, that would be great. We're going to have a Q&A session towards the end of the session. Do feel free to put your questions in the chat function as you go along. We will be monitoring that during the course of the webinars, and we'll pick that up in a Q&A session at the end. And lastly, if you have got any thoughts or quotes that you're willing and able to share, post the event on Twitter, that would be really, really appreciated. In terms of the agenda, this introduction is going to be 5 minutes. Then I'm going to hand over to Bob to talk about Bounce Together for 15 minutes. Then over to Adrian to talk about Teachappy for 15 minutes. And then last but not least, over to Liz from Carnegie Centre of Excellence. We'll have a Q&A session for around 10 minutes. For the mathematicians as part of the group, you can see that already adds up to 60 minutes, but if you could just maybe bear with us for another minute or two as we go through the next steps, that would be really, really appreciated. So in terms of what we hope you look to get out of the next hour, there's 3 objectives from our perspective. So we want to tell you very briefly, and it is very briefly, about WellTogether. How and why did it evolve? But the majority of today's session is actually about providing you with some tips and practical examples to address your immediate well-being needs and your ongoing needs for the school as a whole. Okay, so that's going to be the core essence. There's lots of practical examples and tips. And you'll be glad to know that we're also going to provide some free WellTogether resources to support, again, your immediate needs, but also your whole school approach to wellbeing. So please do listen out for more during the course of the webinars and also towards the end of the webinar as well. Just before I actually go into about what WellTogether is, I'd love you just individually, literally in a couple of words or a sentence in the chat function, just tell us what is the one key thing that you're really looking to get out of today. I think it's really useful that we just understand from your perspective. So if you can just start maybe putting your thoughts in the chat now about what you're really looking to get out of today, that'll be fantastic. So in terms of a brief introduction to WellTogether, rather than me talk, I thought it would be better to actually just encapsulate this through a 35-second video. I always think a video just portrays the message a lot better than someone talking. So in terms of the why, I think our shared experiences, that being Bounce Together, Teachappy, Leeds Carnegie, was that schools typically are looking for at least one of measurement of well-being, a training about well-being, or a mental health award. So it seemed very logical for us to actually package that under one package rather than three distinct elements, which gives the school two benefits. One, a time saving, and secondly, a cost saving as well. So that was the logic behind bringing WellTogether together. So look, we're not here to talk about WellTogether and the ins and outs of it today. It's about giving you lots of practical tips and examples. So I'm going to stop talking now. I think my 5 minutes are up, and I'm going to pass over to Bob. I'm going to be very disciplined with timekeeping as well. So Bob, your 15 minutes start now.
Thank you for the heads up, Andy. I'll just share my screen and hopefully everyone can see this. Just nod if you can see that okay and hear me okay. Amazing. Okay, so Andrew's already introduced myself, and I'm going to be talking to you all today and delivering a short session, 15 minutes and counting, exploring how you can go about measuring well-being in schools, and hopefully giving you some practical advice and tips along the way. So let's jump into it. So first, to just kind of set a bit of context and a bit of a scene, paint a little bit of a picture, I guess. We're going to, in fact, sorry, let me just...
Bob, your presentation's not on the screen at the moment.
Oh, right, my apologies. Okay. Thank you for that.
There you go. Yeah, perfect. There we go.
Yeah, okay, super. So we're going to just set a little bit of context, first of all, and we're going to talk about well-being in school and ultimately why does it matter, set that little bit of a scene. This is a whole topic in itself. But just quickly summarize, I want to just go through three sort of main things. The first thing being that children with higher levels of mental well-being do better in school, and there's copious amounts of research to support this. There's more and more research that's also coming out as well, which again just reinforces the link between health and academic outcomes. Secondly, it's been shown that school has a huge impact on our lives as children and as adults. So specifically, if we take emotional health as an example of this, and there's been a big study by Professor Richard Layard that looks at a big longitudinal study, which found that emotional health in childhood is actually the strongest predictor of happiness and life satisfaction in adulthood. So those things are really, really closely linked. And then thirdly, the third point of why wellbeing matters in school is because ultimately we're human beings and we care about other people. I care about my staff and the Bounce Together team in the same sense that you all care about pupils, and you want them to do well. And when we're feeling good, when I am feeling good, I tend to do good things. I'm more productive and can think clearly and can perform better. And to just sort of, this really epitomizes everything for me on this slide. It's a quote from Adrian Bethune, which just really summarizes all the reasons why wellbeing sort of matters in school. He's got a lovely way with words, and you will hear from him next. But I would actually hear why wellbeing is important to you. So if you've got thoughts of your own on that, which I'm sure you have, then tell us about that. Let us know in the chat. So why should we look to measure well-being in school? And surely if it's so important, as we've looked at, then it is something that we should be measuring. And as a very smart man once said, you treasure what you measure. And measuring well-being can bring you many benefits as well. And we're going to explore some of those. So measuring well-being can help you learn more about your own school. And the picture on the screen, you know, it epitomizes this really. It's to say that sometimes it's better to hear things from the horse's mouth, and that's exactly who we should be engaging with. Secondly, it can provide a benchmark for your own unique setting. And this is really, really useful so that you know how your own school is doing, not just what the ONS data tells us or the BBC News conference. And ultimately speaking, how do you know where you are if you don't measure it and if you don't understand it? Perhaps you're measuring an intervention or keen to measure an intervention, and you want to see the impact of that. And if you have a benchmark for that, it will let you easily see and measure and monitor the progress. Thirdly, why we should measure wellbeing, it can give your entire school community the chance to share their own thoughts and their own feelings. And that sort of, I think, is quite a nice thing. The actual process of measuring wellbeing itself gives the staff, gives pupils an opportunity to express and to share their own feelings. And I think that in itself shows that you care. And I think if you're regularly talking and communicating about wellbeing in school and out of school, then it will become easier to talk about, and it will ultimately be easier to make that part of your school's culture and your school's ethos. And then lastly, why should you measure wellbeing? Well, to demonstrate impact, and to demonstrate that and tell that through compelling stories and really powerful stories that you can tell as part of that. And maybe that's that you've increased pupil confidence, their happiness, or their motivation and behaviours. I think ultimately, as well as feeling it, measuring wellbeing enables you to prove it and to see it tangibly. So if you're hopefully open to the idea of embarking on your own wellbeing journey, you might be asking yourselves where to begin and where do we start with this? Well, we can break this down into a number of steps, and what I want to show you on screen are some of the ways that, not a surefire approach, but it's an approach that can be applied to both staff and to pupils, be it at home or learning at school, or a mixture of the two. Sometimes it's quite difficult to keep up at the moment, to be honest. So step one, and I think one thing that can be useful here in understanding where we begin with this is to think with the end in mind. So you can actually fast forward 6 months and truly paint that picture of yourself of what you would like to see happening in your school. And if you know where you want to be, then ultimately it will be easier for you to plan and understand how you can go about getting to that place as well. Next, we come to the step 2, which is ultimately about choosing the measure or the questionnaire that you want to use as part of measuring wellbeing in school. And there's lots of thought that you will need to give to this, but luckily there are a number of resources out there to help. So on our website, and I've listed one of these on the screen for us to help, where we list a number of resources that are available for schools to download freely that will help you embark on that journey and provide a starting point for the measure that you want to use. And secondly, the Anna Freud Toolkit. So you can Google this. Again, it's a free resource to download that's got a whole host of information in there about the measures that you might want to use when you start on that journey of measuring wellbeing in your setting. Now, I think what is something to consider here, and certainly our recommendation to consider, is using something initially, if you're starting on that wellbeing journey, is using something that is validated and is tested. Feel free to come up with your own questions and ask that as part of measuring wellbeing, but certainly as a starting point, if you're less familiar doing that, then we would recommend to use something that's already out there. And there are a lot of resources that are out there for you as well to use. So if you use a questionnaire or measure already in school, tell us about what that is and let us know what it is in the chat, because we'd love to hear and understand more about what schools are using as well. So the third step, so notify and explain. So here you'll want to be upfront and honest with pupils and staff and engage those key people. I think that's a really positive thing to do, because you are likely to be doing these things and wanting to engage around this to make them and to help them feel better, not worse. So I think that's really a positive message to convey. And we actually have, again, resources on our website that can enable you to engage key people to help you do that as well. Next, you'll want to capture the data and to look at using a system to actually go ahead and capture that information for you. There's one or two tools that you can use out there to do this. I have to bite my tongue at this point. But I think the key thing here is to use the right tool for the job, and to use something that truly fits the bill for what you're looking to achieve. That makes it easy, something that's useful within a school context, as opposed to something perhaps that's non-purpose built for that environment. And to continue, to the next step is to report and to analyse the data. So when you've actually collected those results, when you've run the surveys with pupils or with staff and parents, if you're engaging them as well, then what you don't want to be doing is collating hundreds of paper-based results and going through rows and rows of data to look at the results. So again, fits quite nicely with using the right system that helps you to understand it in your own setting. And maybe you can use something that enables you to dive deeper into the data as well, that lets you look at the results at certain groups, potentially look at male and female, pupil premium, year groups and different classes in school. And that will help paint a picture in its own right and in itself. And also in that, give consideration not just to that subjective data that you've captured, but also the objective data as well, and your own observations and professional judgment on the back of that. And then next, let people know what happened. So what did the results show? I don't think there's anything worse than me completing a survey and then not knowing what happened with the results and hearing anything about it. So this is really important for both staff and pupils, and try and get everyone on board and help engage with all key parties to help you really paint that picture for everyone. This isn't a tick box exercise that we're implementing. This is talking about something really serious. So I think it involves everyone, and everyone should know what the results showed and maybe what you're not doing so well, but also what you do already do really well. So try and convey the positives as part of that as well.
I've done it and I'll just keep checking it.
Next, make a plan and make sure you act on that plan. So once you've assessed those results and engaged key stakeholders, engage them again so that you can ask them and understand how you can improve and how you can move forward. I think people, generally speaking, like to be asked their opinion on something, particularly children, in my experience. So ask them as well. They might actually have the answer to the problems that the results have shown up. And lastly, make it timeable with that. Make sure you actually deliver on your promises. And then finally, review and measure again, and understand and see whether actually have the changes that we've made and have the conversations that we've engaged with pupils and staff and parents actually made an impact, and have we ultimately executed the right things. And again, it's really important to look at the objective and subjective data as part of that, to take everything into account. So, in summary, you treasure what you measure, and measuring wellbeing is a positive thing to be doing and can be extremely beneficial. And potentially, I've demonstrated that it might be easier to do that than you first thought. Secondly, measuring wellbeing can inform your overall school improvement strategy, and it can help you understand areas for improvement and help you to evidence key things that you're doing as a school. And if you're doing things well as a school, which you will be doing inevitably, then you should probably keep doing those. And measuring wellbeing helps you get that sense and helps you get that tangible evidence to know if that's the right course of action. Choose the right platform. So take your time to get this bit right. You don't want to create wellbeing issues having lots of pieces of paper around the place and having to sift through rows and rows of data. So make sure you've got a good bit of kit that can help you analyse the information that you've collected and all that time that you spent. And then remember that wellbeing in school is a moving target, so it will change, and not just in school, but also at home as well, and in different environments. It will change as a consequence of those things. But if you are measuring it regularly, then you're more likely to understand it, and you're better informed and better placed to be able to provide support. And finally, one thing to bring to your attention is that as part of our work with WellTogether, we're actually giving schools a free wellbeing survey. So more information on that will actually be circulated after the webinar. So I hope that's helped. I am within the 15 minutes, I hope, and I thank everyone else for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to share my screen now.
I've just realised I was on mute there. Sorry. just before I hand it over to you, Adrian, I was talking to myself there. Just maybe 30 seconds. If there's any particular questions to do with the measurement side, maybe now just sort of write them in the chat box now, just before we go over to the training aspect. So I'll just give people 20 or 30 seconds to put any questions in there.
Cool. Whilst they're doing that, I will get ready.
Okay, over to you, Adrian.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for attending this session this afternoon. I'm Adrian Bethune. I'm a part-time primary school teacher and governor at school in Aylesbury. I'm author of a couple of books, Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom, and co-author of A Little Guide to Teacher Wellbeing and Self-Care, and also the founder of Teachappy. I wanted to just start by really talking about the kind of philosophy behind Teachappy. Bob has kind of touched upon a couple of points, and really this is how I see the ultimate purpose of education. And really what I think, I think of this myself as a parent of two young boys, but also as of a teacher, having taught for the last 10 years, is ultimately we want young people to grow up leading good lives, to be happy, fulfilled and satisfied with their lives. So whatever they go on to be, whether they are doctors or artists or painters and decorators or teachers, whatever it is they choose, and likely it's going to be multiple kind of careers that they will end up doing, we want them to feel happy and satisfied with their choices and the lives that they lead. You know, how are we doing so far? Well, the research shows not very well. That over the last decade, according to Children's Society data, there's been a significant decrease in children's life satisfaction over the last 10 years, and also a significant increase in poor mental health in children and young people. As Bob alluded to, there was longitudinal research carried out at the London School of Economics, and what it showed was that a child's emotional health was the strongest predictor of adult life satisfaction. And in fact, the weakest predictor in this study, when they looked at a whole range of factors, was a child's intellectual development. And this was particularly acute at the age of 16. But then what the researchers did was they stacked everything in favor of academic attainment. So they included all the qualifications a person ever obtains, because obviously at the age of 16, people still go on to achieve more and learn more. And what it found was that didn't matter if people went on to get GCSEs, A-levels, degrees, masters, PhDs, a child's emotional health at the age of 16 was significantly more important than all the qualifications a person ever obtains in terms of predicting their adult happiness. And we also know from research that teachers, and this is true of both primary and secondary teachers, have a major impact on children's happiness whilst at school. So the philosophy behind Teachappy, and I know it's the philosophy at the school that I work at, is that, you know, if we want our children to grow up feeling to be happy whilst at school and to grow up to be happy adults, coupled with the fact that we know that schools and teachers have a major impact on their happiness whilst at school, and that their happiness in childhood is the strongest predictor of them growing up to be happy adults, then this is where we should be investing a lot more time, energy and resources. And also Bob mentioned that there's a wealth of research out there that shows that there was a Public Health England study called The Link Between Pupil Health, Wellbeing and Attainment. And it showed that when schools put in place whole school programs to develop children's social and emotional skills, they show improvements in attendance, so children turn up to school more often, more frequently, improvements in behaviour, so children are getting on better with each other, and also improvements in academic attainment. And in the Public Health England research, it was on average, schools that did this showed a 10% gain in attainment. And just recently, as Bob's alluded to, there is more and more research coming out all of the time. There was an impact study carried out by Oxford University, Dr. Ariel Lindorf, looking at international research in the link between well-being and attainment. And I'll just read one short quote from it. She says that there's strong international evidence to support the claim that whole school approaches to promoting well-being can have an effect on academic attainment and have positive effects on a wide range of other educational outcomes, such as mental health, self-esteem, self-efficacy, motivation, behavior, and decreased probability of dropout. So for me, it's a no-brainer that schools that focus on well-being, they have happier students, they have happier staff, and they have ultimately pupils that are doing better in school, achieving more. So because this is just a 15-minute talk, I wanted to give just two kind of practical ideas that are based in research that you can use now, whether it's in real life classrooms or remotely. The first is this idea, it's called What Went Well. It's sometimes referred to as 3 good things. And it links to research carried out by Professor Martin Seligman, who's positive psychologist based at the University of Pennsylvania. His research was carried out on adults. But what happened was, in his study, he got participants for 1 week to write down at the end of every day 3 things that had gone well for them and why. And then they measured their levels of well-being before the study, after a week, and then 6 months later. And what they found was that there was a gradual but significant increase in people's well-being over this time. And they couldn't understand why such a short intervention, it was just 1 week, had such a long-term impact, up to 6 months later. And what they found was that people in the study had enjoyed doing the 3 good things activity, and many had carried on with it after the study had finished. And what they found was that those people that had continued doing the 3 good things the longest showed the biggest improvements in their well-being. So what some of the teachers do in our school is they have a What Went Well board. On a Friday afternoon, we think back over our week and we think about the fun lessons that we've had, the great games we've played at playtime, the tasty meals we've had at lunch, whatever it is, small good things that have actually happened to us over the week. And the children write them down on a Post-it note. And then they put a star next to one of their 3 good things, and they get to share it as a whole class. So we end our week on a high. It's such a simple activity. It's very, very low cost. It just costs, a few Post-it notes every week, and you don't have to do it on Post-it notes. You can be creative. And it takes about 15 to 20 minutes out of a whole school week, but it has a big impact. What's really lovely about, since having written my book, teachers on Twitter often tweet me about how they've brought to life some of the ideas from my book. And Miss Felsinger, a primary school teacher, tweeted me recently and said, ended an exhausting week on a high with a virtual What Went Well wall. Their notes have brought positivity to me all day as they've come through, and it was very needed. So this is just a really creative way. It doesn't matter that we're kind of doing this part teaching in real life, part teaching remotely. What Went Well can work in both environments. And these ideas evolve as well over time. Just a week later, the same teacher tweeted me to say, even better this week using Padlet, so a piece of software that's free for teachers to use. The children loved it because they felt connected to each other and could add motivational quotes too. So you've got, I'll just read a couple of these out, these What Went Wells. In my writing, it was really descriptive, and I thought it was really good as I wrote more than I thought I would. I feel like I'm just proud of everything I've been doing this week, and I'm mostly proud of my maths. So this is really essentially what this activity does. Is it rewires our innate negativity bias, so that the fact that our minds naturally dwell on and remember negative things more easily than positive things, what this activity does is it intentionally gets us to notice, to savor, to pay attention to, and to dwell on the small good things that are happening every day that we just normally, they pass us by. So it's a great activity, and I would thoroughly recommend that you do it in class, but also remotely. The second idea I wanted to share was random acts of kindness and how important they are and what the research shows. So just very succinctly, the science of kindness, which I find fascinating. Kindness is contagious. We have this pay it forward mentality that is hardwired into us as humans, that if someone is kind to us, we are likely to be kind to other people. An example often given is if you're driving along in a car and someone lets you out at a junction, you're far more likely to let someone else out at a future junction. And this is why kindness has a ripple effect. A small act of kindness can kind of spread quite far and quite wide. The other thing about kindness, and this is backed up by a lot of research, is when we are kind to others, the reward center of our brain lights up. We get a hit of dopamine, that feel-good hormone. So doing good actually feels good. Like, happier people generally are more giving and kind to others. And it works the other way around too. The more kind and giving we are to others, the happier we feel. And finally, when we receive, or when we simply witness an act of kindness, our bodies release a hormone called oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone or the tend and befriend hormone. What oxytocin does is it does our bodies good. It lowers our blood pressure. It reduces the level of cortisol, the stress hormones in our system. It even triggers the release of nitric oxide, which in turn reduces the amount of free radicals in our system, which cause tissue damage and cell aging. So my plea is, if you want to stay looking youthful and young, is to just be kind. And if you don't feel like a particularly kind person, then just watch other people be kind and you will still get oxytocin. But because kindness is contagious, it will eventually rub off onto you. So what we've done in my school for the last kind of 2 years is host, and it's called To Be Kind Week. We typically do this in Anti-Bullying Week, but there is no reason that you cannot do it at any point in the year. And we get children to carry out random acts of kindness at home or in their local community. And also we do class acts of kindness where classes go out into the local community. It might be litter picking, it might be, I've had classes before that have gone to a local train station and sung songs to commuters to cheer them up. Obviously we can't do that right now given the restrictions, but again, we can still be creative. What we did at Broughton Junior School was did a whole school art project. We did the Take One Picture art project, which is organised by the National Gallery. It was a George Bellows piece of art, and every class chose a different medium and created some bespoke, vibrant, eye-catching pieces of art. We then contacted local care homes, and we just said to them, look, we've created these works of art for you to brighten up the rooms in your care homes, to let the carers and the residents know that we're thinking of them and that they're not alone at this kind of difficult time. And then we started to get emails back saying, yes, we'd love some of your artwork. They sent us pictures of the art on display. And with their permission, they sent pictures of residents looking at the art, opening the art, enjoying and savouring the beautiful works of art that we'd created. I just wanted to share this note that a previous school had been sent when we did It's Called To Be Kind Week, because I just think it's so relevant to what's happening now. It says, "Dear head teacher, I've been meaning to send this note for several weeks and apologise for the delay. I wanted to say a very heartfelt thank you for you and your staff for encouraging the children in your care to think about others in their random acts of kindness. I received a delicious cookie and a lovely poinsettia. I've been widowed this year and I cannot say how much I appreciated this act of kindness. Thank you very much indeed." And I just think, with everything that's going on around us at the moment, with, so many people losing loved ones, now our schools could genuinely be a real force for good in their local communities, more so than we ever have been. We've always been a force for good, but we could do these kindness projects and think about who needs our kindness and our support right now. Could be carers in care homes and residents there. It could be NHS workers. It could be the key workers that stack our shelves and deliver our shopping. But either way, there's a real opportunity to turn a difficult situation into one that is empowering and that spreads good in the world. And just finally, before I hand over to Liz, we mustn't forget about staff wellbeing in all of this. Typically, when we talk about wellbeing in schools, the focus is predominantly on the children. But ultimately, if teachers are not well, it's almost impossible for children that are in their care for so long to be well as well. So it's really important that staff take care of themselves and that we set a good example. And I love this quote from developmental psychologist Alison Gopnik. It says, "Children learn far more from their caregivers' unconscious behaviours than any of their conscious manipulations." So what I'm giving away as part of this WellTogether talk is access to an online training course that I've created based on wellbeing in the primary classroom. It's a free module on staff wellbeing, where you'll learn tips based on research about managing stress, creating healthier habits, maintaining perspective, learning how to be good enough and leaving those kind of perfectionist tendencies behind, and also the importance of laughter. Because it's really important that staff look after themselves, and that we realize that we need to probably do a bit less and, you know, think about the long game right now. So I hope you found just a couple of those tips useful and practical, and I'm now going to hand over to Liz Dawson from Carnegie Centre of Mental Health Excellence in Schools.
Well done, Adrian. Right on 15 minutes. So you've obviously been practicing that over the last 24 hours with the stopwatch on. So well done for that.
That's
Thanks
just
for
being a teacher.
lots of comments in the chat box there as well. So thank you very much as well. We've picked up some of the questions, but again, maybe just pause for 30 seconds if you've got any questions about the training aspect. And just whilst you're having a think about that and putting any more questions in chat, we'll hand over to yourself, Liz. So no pressure, everyone else has done 15 minutes on the dot. So your 15 minutes start now, Liz, over to you.
Thank you very much. Right, here we go. Can you see my blue screen?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So, just by way of introduction, my name's Liz Dawson. I'm a former deputy head of 2 secondary schools, and I've been a leadership consultant for a local authority. And I'm now the lead coach for the School Mental Health Award at Leeds Beckett University. But I also coach for leadership and wellbeing across a range of primary and secondary schools in West Yorkshire and beyond, because most of my work has been on Zoom for a very long time. And it's lovely to see that some people, I've recognised names already. We have people who I'm absolutely in awe of, who are working tirelessly in their schools. I know because there are people that have achieved the School Mental Health Award at gold level. One particular colleague from Belfast, welcome Corin, and apologies to others. There's so many screens. We have over 80 people here that it's impossible for me to see everybody's names as I prepared for my little bit. Okay, so what I'd like to give you this afternoon, and this is really fed back from the most recent coaching I have done of middle and senior leaders in the schools that I work with, is to give you an opportunity to think strategically. What I'm finding with the schools that I'm working with is that people are trying their very best, obviously, to support the pupils and the staff in their schools and the parents, but what they're not doing is keeping that strategic thought at the centre of all that they're doing, and they're trying to do everything themselves. They're feeling overwhelmed. So hopefully over the next 13 and a half minutes that I have left, I will try to give you some space to think strategically. That's why I'm starting with a blank screen, and hopefully we'll pull back into one later on. So clearly, it's really important for school leaders, for you and your governors, to be thinking about what it is that you need to be supporting for the pupils. And also the other key thing, and that's already been alluded to by my colleagues, is about the support for staff. And I make no apologies for putting those equally there. And we get lots of examples of how important that is. First, put on your own mask, you will have heard of before. These kinds of things to remind you how important it is. Because if our staff aren't as well as they possibly can be whilst we're fighting a pandemic, then clearly they're not going to be able to support the pupils and their parents. So taking a step back from what that support is, it's really key that the leadership and strategy is in place within the school. And I hear some of the people that I coach saying, well, I haven't got time for that at the moment. But if we don't take this step back and think strategically, we're always going to be in firefighting mode. And even those that have thought strategically and have got good structures in place, as I mentioned before, are falling back into reactionary mode. So hopefully the build-up of this slide will help you just refocus a little this evening. Sitting underneath that leadership and strategy are the organisational structures and the ongoing maintenance and development of the school's culture, because those then feed in to supporting for pupils and also supporting for staff. What I also have in this top corner here is this governance word, and as a governor myself, And having really valued, when I was a senior leader, the importance of governance, it's absolutely key that governors are at the heart of all of this so that they understand and are well trained in understanding the importance of mental health and well-being for all the staff and the pupils and for themselves, and that know that the kind of questions that they need to be asking, but also understand the importance of the financial support in order to ensure that the correct support for staff and pupils is available. And there's that professional development, not only of your staff, but also the governors. Working with parents and carers is an absolute key part, and I hope you don't feel that I'm telling you about this. It's reminding you, you absolutely know, and I know on a daily basis that all leaders in schools and their teams are outreaching and trying to support the parents and carers in many ways at the moment, which is why this arrow here I think is really key. It's not only about working with the parents directly, it's also then pulling into how the parents can support the pupils, but as we know how important it is to support the pupils in supporting the parents and the parents' mental health and well-being needs. Now, clearly they're not our total responsibility within schools, but signposting parents to adult support for themselves, recognising the impact that their poor mental health can be having on the pupils. There's this continuing shift of the paradigm there between those. In addition to you directly supporting the parents and giving your best support to the pupils, it's really going to be key for you to be working with external agencies. And that is really key, not only for the pupils and the parents, but also in terms of supporting staff. We can set up programmes to support the staff internally within school. However, there are some things, and I would suggest that supervision, particularly for senior leaders and for those who are involved in pastoral support, that perhaps that supervision should not be internal within the school. Clearly that will depend upon finances, and often when I'm talking to the head teacher of a school, if they're interested in looking at additional support within the school, they say, well, we can't afford to. My question is, can you afford not to? And I think that's really a question that senior leaders should be asking of their governors. So that, yes, there can be supervision within the school, and there is a separate supervision award that Leeds Beckett University offers that looks at the structure of what that can look like. However, there can be some within the school, but there are certain situations, and particularly for those that are supervising others, who supervises them? Because I don't really believe that somebody that's supervising one person can effectively supervise the other one back if that's a model throughout the whole school. It's not got a strong foundation. Okay, so having built that up, let's take ourselves back to this. So that's where I started about 6 minutes ago, and we've built up to this picture. But really, what we can be feeling, and what I find that senior leaders and those that are really at the sharp end of supporting mental health and well-being in schools, is they're feeling more like this. So what I'd like you to do, just for a moment, is if you are getting to that overwhelmed stage, let's just use, and you may well have seen these before, just an opportunity for us to breathe with this image. Taking time out just for a few seconds can often reset your thinking, reset you, whether it's in the car park before you go into school in the morning. Just an opportunity for a few seconds of time out can be really, really helpful. What I'd like to show you now is looking back and thinking back on that diagram that I built up shortly, a little while ago, is just to show you a clip of somebody that has used this process of strategic thinking and what she says has been the impact on supporting pupils in her school.
And I think when you first think of mental health, you're thinking just about the children. And at the beginning, as you know, I was saying, well, we do this, and we do this. Yes, we did, but now we're seeing it much more as a bigger picture, and it's not something that is one person or two people's role. It's got to be that culture in school, and it has got to be something that is continued. Whether we got the award or we didn't get the award, this is a really, really important issue, especially for our children. We're finding at the minute that we need to be focusing on. And I think the different sections makes you look at it all a little bit differently. Like the organisation of the structure of the staffing was different to how you support the staff. They were two different things. And I think first when you just say staff, it was, oh, well, we do this. But actually, had the staff been on much training, had they had much, how do we organise it so that staff are involved in it? It focused us.
So that's Emma talking about how that helped to focus her thoughts and how she was then able to involve other people in supporting the pupils. And to pick up on what Adrian said towards the end of his presentation about the importance on the support for staff, I'd just like to share this video of another person that I've been working with using this model that I've built up for you this afternoon. The impact it's had on the school.
Oh, massive, 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 massive. One of the biggest shifts personally for me that I've come across in my career. So the impact it's had on our staff, I would say, is significant. It's sort of empowered me really to be able to use a vehicle to sort of drive through changes that are absolutely necessary, that I always knew were important, but now I know why they're important, which I didn't know before. It was just like a gap. I knew something wasn't quite right, didn't know what it was, but now I do. So yes, impact on staff has been massive.
Okay. What I'd like to do, because it might not, as Emma was saying in that first image there, as first video, it might not necessarily be that obvious as to what those differences are between the leadership and the strategy and what you have in place. So I'd just like to give you a couple of examples of the sorts of things that underpin that thought process and the sorts of things that leaders in schools will be doing. So making sure that in your school you have a named lead, because if the lead for mental health and wellbeing doesn't sit on the senior leadership, then how are those senior leadership decisions being made without being thought of through the lens of mental health and wellbeing in the school? So to make sure that a named senior lead is in place within your SLT, and that there is a named governor for mental health and wellbeing, again, part of the leadership of the school. And that there are a range of policies, huge range of policies. There may well be one policy that covers the mental health and wellbeing of the staff and the pupils. They could be separate ones, but there's a lot of policies that do feed into mental health and wellbeing. So making sure that those policies are there in support of the pupils and the staff. But I'm taking this from the angle of the staff at this point. And that strategies and structures are implemented to improve mental health and wellbeing. So those are what I see as being the overarching leadership. Some examples there. Moving on to the strategy. Regularly consulting, and we've heard this afternoon about the importance and also examples of how to consult, questionnaires being a key one that we've had highlighted this afternoon. Communication protocols. Particularly, I'm just going to make a little plea for this one, out of hours emailing. And quite often when I talk with schools, they say, oh, well, our policy is that we can send them out at any time, but nobody needs to respond to them. But having myself sat there as a highly stressed senior leader who eventually did go off long-term sick for 5 months before I was recovered sufficient to go back into work, receiving those emails at the weekend, sometimes past midnight, had a significant impact on my well-being, even though I knew I didn't need to reply to them. So to revisit, perhaps, if that is the policy within your school, is it the best policy, particularly at the moment for staff, when they are working through different media in order to communicate with their colleagues? Can you perhaps pull that back to a better timing frame during the daytime so that they have as much free time late on in the evenings, over the weekends, during the holidays when they do come? So unless it's absolutely necessary, what are those protocols there? And the expectations of workload being well managed. All the usual triggers that we've had in the past of being able to recognise people passing down the corridor and so on are generally not there at the moment when people are working in such a different way. So how can you manage people's expectations in terms of your communication and how you model it as senior leaders in particular? And then the support level. What have you got in place? A comprehensive health and wellbeing offer that is understood by all. People know where to go for it, and that there is supervision, coaching and counselling available. It's essential, I believe, in some roles in school. It's desirable or helpful for others. It is not a sign of weakness, and it needs to be challenged as a stigma if it is. And finally, that people are encouraged to participate in those activities that you put on to foster mental health and well-being. Okay, and that is the end of my short presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Liz. I think pretty much spot on time. So the last 10 minutes now, thank for everyone's patience and lots of chat going on. So thank you very much for that. I've tried to scribble down the key questions that have come through the 3 presentations. So let me just share my screen, and hopefully the key questions that have been asked are showing. I think we've got 7 questions there, so we'll take them in turn. Adrian, Liz and Bob, no more than a minute each in terms of replies. Sarah, you've been incredibly prolific with your questioning. Thank you very much for that. I think you've raised the question on each of the subject areas. So let's just go through the questions. First one, are there any adapted surveys or resources for SEND students? That has come from Katrina. Bob, can you briefly take that one?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. It's a good question. I suppose I can't comment on specific measures out there that I'm aware of, but I do know that there are some really cool and innovative solutions out there that can sort of make those surveys more accessible for EAL and SEND children. I agree, it's definitely a consideration because arguably there's nothing worse than answering a wellbeing survey, which in turn creates a wellbeing issue. So I can speak for Bounce Together. We've taken that into account with our platform. So there's some really exciting and interesting technology out there that enables the experience to be made more comfortable for the end users. So for example, there's technology that enables you to change the background colors, change the font size. You can actually translate the language of the questions in some cases as well, which would particularly obviously help with EAL children. So I don't know about specific measures. Don't know if the rest of the panel do, but I know that there's sort of technology out there that can assist with that in a digital fashion.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone from the SEND schools that use particular bespoke surveys for SEND students? We'd love to hear from you and explore that in a bit more detail with you. Thanks for that, Bob. Moving on, second question from Sarah. I think this is for Adrian. What is the best book to start with, Adrian? What would you recommend?
Well, having written a couple of books,
I knew what the answer was.
No, but what I would say, okay, to start with, a book that massively influenced my thinking in terms of education and how to approach teaching and learning from a wellbeing perspective It sounds really dry, this book, but it's called The Social Neuroscience of Education by Louis Cozolino. I'll put this in the chat in a minute. There's also a book called Teaching Happiness and Wellbeing in Schools by Ian Morris. Those two books are probably the biggest books that have influenced my approach to wellbeing. Then the two books I wrote, Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom and, sorry, just not my mic, A Little Guide to Teacher Wellbeing and Self-Care, just because they took a year to write each, probably a bit less for the second one because I co-wrote it with Emma Kell. But it's just everything that I know about teaching happiness and wellbeing in schools put into a book. And then there are other brilliant books like The Wellbeing Toolkit by Andrew Cowley, books by Pookie Knightsmith. There are so many out there that there's not just like one. You're going to have to, if you really care about this, then do your research and actually enjoy the process of reading all of these amazing books with these slightly different approaches and perspectives on wellbeing and education. But there's so much out there that, you know, I'm constantly reading new stuff and learning new things. So
if you didn't catch all of those, as Adrian was saying, then please do reach out on the Twitter account. Adrian will gladly, I'm sure, put those books in the Twitter feed. Thanks for that, Adrian. Rachel asked, how can we reach out better to parents? I think this was in relation to yourself, Liz, and your session. So if you could take that.
Yeah, sure. I think that schools are clearly doing a great amount to reach out to parents, and there are two sides to this at the moment, and I'm very mindful of a letter that you may not have had a chance to read yet. I have the luxury of catching up on newspapers first thing in the morning. A head teacher from a school in Lancashire who sent a letter out to parents saying, well done for what you are doing. And I think those continual affirmations of the parents that good is good enough, and actually if they don't feel good, that's good enough as well. Not to be overwhelmed by the amount of work that's being sent home. There are other parents then that are being critical because they're not getting any online work. I saw that in the news last night. Parental communication, listening to what the parents need, but also trying to be as supportive of them as possible. And also, as a sideline from that question, just to really plug, tell your staff that they're doing really well too. Just affirming people that we're all going through the same experience out there, but we're all processing it in very different ways, and what we're doing is good enough. And if it isn't, and you've got great concerns for those parents and those children, then look into those outside agencies. But communication, keeping those channels of communication open, they will be different at the moment, but the principle of it is exactly the same, whether we're in a pandemic or not.
Okay, just conscious of time, so probably just pick out a few of those. When, Sarah, you asked quite early on actually, when do you ask children, parents and staff to complete surveys? Bob, can you take that one, please?
Yep, I just made a few notes here as well. It's a good question. I suppose it is important as well, the time that you do run a survey. But I suppose the more precise answer around that probably depends more around what you're sort of looking to measure as part of that. So for example, if you're looking to measure the effectiveness of a certain intervention that you've put in place, then you might decide to take a baseline beforehand and afterwards, thus measuring the impact. I suppose if you're looking at sort of a more general and broad snapshot of your school, then you may decide to sort of do that once or twice a term, so that you've kind of got that picture over the course of a school year. A lot of schools tell us that they do it that way. I suppose even, you know, in any of those circumstances, you might have reservations around that, because you might think that if a pupil completes the survey after lunchtime, after they've fallen out with a friend, that you might get a very different result, and it might skew your results. So I suppose that's why it's really important to also consider the context as well as the timing. So really just set the scene for your pupils and ask them not just to reflect, if they can, in the now and in the moment, but rather to reflect on the experiences or feelings of the past few weeks or over a period of time. A lot of the surveys that have been produced kind of factor that in, and that's the sort of context that's typically set with them. And I suppose in all of that, consistency is really key as well. So make sure that if you are running a survey in small groups of children, that they've also had the same brief and they've been given the same information around the context and the why you're running that survey, to make sure that there is consistency shown in your results as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. We'll keep these 2 questions and responses very, very short. Sarah, I like the idea of the virtual what went well. Actually, I think we all did. I think that went down particularly well. From a virtual perspective, Adrian, where else can schools capture that?
A teacher in our school, Ella, she was hosting a live assembly, and what she did was email her class and just said, please can you come with one what went well to share, and there was just a round of 30 what went wells. Like, you know, it literally can be however you want to do it. So you can do it in the classroom, you can do it on Padlet, you can do it on, like our school uses Seesaw, you can do it whatever platform that I guarantee you will be able to think of a way of doing it. It can be over email, but then I think what's nice is what that teacher did, collate them together. It might be a bit of extra time on your shoulders to do that. Maybe you could find a teaching assistant to help you compile that, but yeah, just be creative. The most important act is getting children and teachers do it as well, to reflect on what is going well, you know, in the context of, yes, other stuff happening, but what small things are going well that we can really focus on and celebrate.
Thanks. And lastly from Andy, do you have wellbeing measures for staff or parents? I'm going to answer that because it will take us on to the next slide, which is what's next. The short answer is yes. But that will go on to what's next and some of the free resources, some of which you've probably picked up during the course of the last hour. So, first of all, future webinars, just while things are fresh in your mind, are there any particular subject areas that you would really, really like us to potentially do a future webinar on? So again, kindly just put that in the chat function, email us, put it in the Twitter feed. Really, really keen to listen what you're looking for going forward. Secondly, we are going to send an email in the next 24 hours. That's going to include 2 things. One is the link to the webinar recording. So if you want to go back to any of the presentations and just go through them again, more than welcome. And you've got access to some immediate free wellbeing resources that will be very, very important both now, but as you go forward. And those resources are from each of the parties, a wellbeing survey from WellTogether, and that's either a pupil one, a staff one, or a parent one. So that links in with the last question from the Q&A session. Adrian is providing a training module on staff wellbeing. And lastly, Liz and Carnegie are going to provide really useful podcast and seminar series. So I think some really, really useful resources that you can use straight away. So we've just got over 5 o'clock. So thank you very much for all of your patience. I'm sure it's time now for a cup of tea or take the dog for a walk or back to work. But thank you very much for everyone listening and attending. I think there's been almost 100 people on this course, which I think tells everyone how important the subject matter is. Really looking forward to sending through the free resources, and hopefully we catch up all with you soon. Thank you very much indeed.